advance further in their development and advancements. So pretty cool. All right, let's get started. All right. At first, the right had its own way, but the colonial question again and again split the bourgeoisie, made it ashamed of itself, destroyed its morale, and weakened its capacity to deal with the great home problems which faced it. With Mirabeau's words ringing in the ears of colonialists, wanted to get colonial questions removed from general discussions and proposed that they should be handed over to the Colonial Commission, consisting of 10 merchants and 10 colonialists. The session ended in disorder. On December 3rd, a great debate began, and the motion of the commission was defeated. The next day, Charles de Lamenth made his eloquent declaration, and henceforth the granting of rights to the biracial, and that's the M word I cannot say, was looked upon as first steps towards abolition of slavery itself. One second. Okay, we'll bring up Aziz. On January 30th, 1790, the biracial people, sponsored by the Friends of Black People, petitioned again. Protestants, comedians, Jewish people, the relations of criminals, all had received their political rights from the assembly. Yet, biracial people were still excluded. It's the M word. It's half white, half black. They use an M word, which is a very, very derogatory term towards biracial people. The assembly turned, because they used to use biracial people in order to engage with colonialism, in order to utilize them as a tool to get in closer with the indigenous population and to be able to, do their thing, their colonialism. Yeah. The assembly turned a deaf ear, but by February, the news from San Domingo, Martinique, and Guadalupe was so ominous that on March 2nd, the assembly appointed a commission to go through the documents and report in 5 days. This was exactly what the Club Mosaic, the colonial deputies, and the maritime bourgeoisie were playing for. And they had everything fixed. The commission, disinterested in appearance, consisted of 12 members, 10 of whom represented some branch of the colonial trade. In addition, the intriguers had Barnave appointed chairman. Intriguers. Barnave is one of the great figures of the French Revolution. He was bourgeois to the bone, a lawyer with a clear, cold intellect. For him, once the bourgeoisie had gained the Constitution and limited the franchise, the revolution was over. Like a good bourgeoisie, he had an immense respect for royal and noble blood. He was intimate with the Lameths, and lived at their house. And through them, he was in close relationship with the absentee landlords and noblemen of the Club Mosaic. The Club Mosaic could have no better advocate. Barnave was a skillful debater and popular. There still hung about him the revolutionary reclaim of a few passionate words, but those who had died in the days of July. The Club Mosaic had its eye on him for a long time. In February, the president of the club sent Barnave a memorandum on the colonial question that Barnave had asked for, and thus it was that, pointed on March 2nd, he had his report ready by March 8th. On that day, speaking for the commission, he proposed all that any reasonable colonist could expect. Colonists should be left to work out their own constitution and to modify the exclusive, both subject to the approval of the National Assembly. In the draft decree, the word slave and the M word, which is biracial, were not mentioned, for the Assembly could not bear to hear them. But Barnave put the colonialists and their property under the special safeguard of the nation. The slaves were property. The decree also declared guilty of crime against the nation whoever tried to excite opposition to any branch of commerce with the colonies, direct or indirect. This was a warning to the friends of black people and gave the official acquittance to all talk about abolition of the traffic. Carried away by such wisdom and delicacy, the bourgeoisie punctuated the reading of the decree and with applause, and Marabout and Pachan and other deputies on the left who tried to invoke the rights of man were shouted down. The Santo Domingo diehards opposed the decree as not giving men enough, but the Assembly dismissed this contemptuously. The friends of black people had been beaten, but they got ready for the debate on the instructions of accompany the decree. Barnave, in his introductory speech and in the instructions themselves, made no reference whatever to the burning question of political rights for biracial people and free black people. The Assembly was fighting hard to forget this awkward problem, but Abby Gorgoria broke the conspiracy of silence. Article 4 of the instructions gave the vote to all persons, quote unquote, 25 years of age who fulfilled certain property and residential qualifications. Gregoria said he understood that this included the mixed race biracial people. A San Domingo deputy protested. Another deputy moved that the decision be closed. Dale Lamenth, the same who had chirped so noisily 3 months before, agreed that Gregoria's indiscreet proposal, quote unquote, should not be discussed. The House decided not to discuss it. The bourgeoisie would not face the issue, sent this ambiguous decree to San Domingo and hope for the best. The decree on March 8th brought roars of rage from the revolutionaries of San Mark. Article 4 said persons, and they proved that biracial people were not persons. If persons meant men, then the decree included slaves. To give rights to these mixed race people would be signing their own death warrant for these friends of the counter-revolutionary bureaucracy who swamped a new assembly. They swore that they would never grant political rights to, quote, bastards and degenerate race, end quote, and launched a new terror against the mixed biracial peoples. But the bureaucrats were taking courage. Many deputies of St. Mark themselves were dropping away, indignant and pretentious of their fellows and fearful of the consequence. Of the original 212, less than half remained. Feeling their support growing, the royalists decided to finish with the revolution in San Domingo, and the Mandat, commander of the troops, marched against the patriots. The Assembly of St. Mark had no force on which it could depend. In the harbor of Port Au Prince was a ship, the Leopard, the crew of which had been won over to the Patriot Party by the municipalities. Defenseless before De Mandut's troops and facing annihilation, 85 patriots, of whom 64 were fathers of families, decided to board the Leopard and go to France to plead their case in person. The bureaucracy wearing the royalist white cockades remained for the time being masters of the field, and all parties decided to wait on what France would say. Meanwhile, however, all sharpened their knives. Political justice, it was clear, was on the side of the stronger battalions. The biracial peoples wished to wear the royalist white cockade, were prohibited by the triumph bureaucrats, rejected in France, humiliated at home. The biracial people organized a revolt. It was a quarrel between bourgeoisie and the monarchy that brought the Paris masses on the political stage. It was the quarrel between whites and biracial peoples that woke the sleeping slaves. If not at the instigate, oh my gosh, I have to peel? What the fuck? There you go. Fuck it. It is not an instigation of friends of black people. At least they say friends of the N-word for the word meaning for black. So that's why. At least with their consent, Oge left Paris to lead the insurrection in San Domingo. And in this, he was aided and abetted by no less a person than Clarkson. Oge went secretly to London, where he was met by Clarkson, where he got money and letters of credit to purchase arms and ammunition in the United States. He landed in San Domingo on October 21st, 1790, and accompanied by his brother and Chavannes, one of the Chavannes, one of the many biracial peoples who had fought in the American War of Independence. He raised the standard of revolt, but Agu was a politician whose gifts were unsuited for the task before him. Thousands of biracial peoples were waiting for the signal from the leader. Instead, he addressed two high-sounding proclamations, not to his supporters, but to the authorities of Le Cap, asking for promulgation. I'm gonna look at this word, everybody. I can't say it, so I'm gonna hear it. Promulgation, sorry, everybody. Promulgation of the decree of March 8th. Instead of threatening them with the raising of the slaves, good liberal as he was, he assured them in advance that he had no intention of doing so, and appealed to the common interests of whites and biracial peoples as slave owners. OGE committed no crimes, but Chavannes massacred a few whites. Red concades and whites drew together. The biracial peoples all over the country were prevented from concentrating by heavy rains and floods, but the because they don't know, through himself and his few hundred men on Le Cap. He was defeated and with a few companions fled into Spanish territory, whence he was extradited. Yeah. The whites tortured OGE and his companions with a trial lasting 2 months. They condemned him of the parish church, bareheaded, and in their shirts, tied by cords round the neck, and there on their knees, with wax candles on their head, to confess their crimes and beg for forgiveness. After which they were to be led to the parade ground, and there have their arms, legs, and elbows broken on a scaffold. After which they were to be bound on wheels, their faces turned to the sky, to remain thus while it pleases God to keep them alive. Their heads were then to be cut off, and their goods and property confiscated. Even in death, the racial division was to be maintained. The written judgment decreed that they were to be executed on the side of the square opposite to that where whites were executed. Chavannes, the soldier, endured without a murmur, but OGE broke down and begged for mercy. 2 days after, OG's brothers suffered the same fate. 21 others were hanged. 13 were sent to the galleys for life. The whole Provincial Assembly of the North attended the execution in state. The brilliant OGE and his success in Paris had been the pride of all biracial peoples. San Domingo and the malevolence of his trial and execution was a searing memory of biracial people's minds. It was the news of OGE's torture, the death which made France as a wholly full aware of the colonial question. Hitherto, the French bourgeoisie had been untroubled by this mass pressure. The constituent refused to accept the protest of the men from the Leopard, broken the assembly of St. Mark, ordering the election of a new assembly, and dispatched 2 regiments of troops to help the governor. But in its instructions, it still left the fate of the biracial peoples and the colonialists. All white San Domingo, pro-independence and anti, were united on one common ground: the maintenance of slavery, right for biracial peoples today. It would be rights for slaves tomorrow. They fought the biracial people's questions as the first outpost of their precious gangs of slaves. The French bourgeoisie saw their point of view, and by shouting down the friends of the black people in the House, intimidated the center and maintained the colonial status quo. Once more, the Paris masses broke the front of reaction and drove the revolution forward. The big bourgeoisie had quite finished with the revolution. The constitution they elaborated divided the masses into active, those who had property qualifications, and passive, the poor who had fought in the streets. The districts association of the masses were abolished, and the bourgeois National Guard carried out a stern policing of Paris. The masses were chained and muzzled, and without the masses, the radical Democrats were merely voices. If the king and queen had been political abstractions and not flesh and blood, they would have lived and died in constitutional monarchs with immense power. But they looked upon all these concessions as merely temporary and plotted ceaselessly with foreign powers for armed intervention. The people knew, as the people always know, during a revolution, and by April 1791, the Paris masses were once more on the offensive. On April 18th, Louis and his family wanted to leave Paris for St. Cloud. For 2 hours, a great crowd refused to let the carriage pass, and the royal family had to turn back. In these turbulent days came the news of OG's martyrdom. Paris, in a ferment, greeted it with revolutionary rage. Soon a tragedy with OGE as hero would be played to crowded houses. When on April 7th, the colonial question came again before the House, Abbe Gregoria, I can't say his name because it's French, took the floor and demanded an adjournment of 4 days in preparations for a debate. Morava de Saint-Mary at once opposed, calling for an immediate voice in the old way, but that could work no longer. The proposal for the adjournment was carried and a date fixed. The bourgeoisie was face to face with the colonial question at last. The debate was one of the greatest which ever shook the Robespierre, which is a name, made the deputies aware of the dangerous games they were playing in so flagrant a breach of the very principles of which their own position rested. Quote, if I should suspect that among those who have opposed rights for the men of color, there was anyone who detested liberty and the Constitution, I would believe that they were merely seeking ways and means of attacking with success your decrees and your principles. Whenever a question arises in which the interest of the metropoles is directly concerned, they will tell you urge without ceasing the rights of man, but you believe in them so little yourself that you have sanctified slavery constitutionally. There was murmuring in the assembly. The supreme interest of the nation and of the colonies is that you remain free and that you do not overturn with your own hands the foundations of liberty. Perish the colonies, violent interruptions. If the price is to be your happiness, your glory, your liberty, I repeat it, perish the colonies. If the colonialists wish to menace, to force us to decree that which is most suitable to their interests, I declare in the name of the assembly, in the name of those members of this assembly who do not wish to overturn the Constitution, in the name of the entire nation which desires freedom, that we will sacrifice to the colonial deputies neither the nation nor the colonies nor the whole of humanity. End quote. Oh, it's just a summary. Thank you for liking the live. I appreciate you. It was magnificent, but it was not abolition. It was only the word slavery Rosenspire was objecting to, not the thing. All had agreed to leave that alone, though it was in all minds. Raymond, admitted to the bar of the House to speak for his people, stated crudely that biracial peoples must be given rights so as to unite with the whites to keep down the slaves. Hour after hour, declamation and argument, abuse and applause testified to the magnitude of the interest presumed to be a sake and a depth of the passion aroused. 4 days it lasted, with all political Paris taking side. Among the spectators, the commercial representatives of the maritime bourgeoisie had a special place. They wrote notes to speakers, made gestures of dissent or prohibition, or approbation. And on account of this prestige, the business experience exercised an immense influence on the uniformed and undecided of the deputies. But all the popular bodies, the Jacobins, the Friends of the Constitution, etc., detested the Club Mosaic and its disgraceful pro-slavery propaganda. The political ranks and file were widely for the mixed race people. The defiance, and it's the M word, I'm not going to say it again. I'm not going to say it all. The defense of the rights of man abroad was the defense of them at home. The parties were evenly matched, and the voting on the resolution and amendments went now one way, now the other. At least on the evening of the fourth day, with the deputies worn out and unable to arrive at the decision, Rubel rose and proposed a compromise. Every biracial person whose parents were both free should have the vote. There were only 400 of these, but it seemed a way out. The compromise proposal was carried by an overwhelming majority, and the spectators cheered. A hard-won victory, small in itself, but a far-reaching implication. For once, a single person of color had got his rights, and victory of the rest was only a matter of work and time. The rich are only defeated when running for their lives. Inexperienced in revolution, the bourgeoisie had not purged the ministerial office where the royalist bureaucrats still sat plotting for a restoration of the royal power. The colonial deputies wrote to the constituents declaring their intentions not to attend any more sessions and conspired with the bureaucrats to sabotage the decree. After many weeks, the constituent discovered that from the day the decree had been passed, a great number of the Colonial Commission had refused to go on with the work. New deputies appointed to carry out the decision of the House reported that they would not attend a commission whose main object was to oppose the decision they were supposed to implement. The decree lay cold in the offices of the minister, and on the night of June 20th, the revolution swung backwards, giving Barnave and his friends their chance. Louis, I don't know if it's Louis or Louis, have completed his plans for invading France at the head of the European counter-revolution, fled to Vernice, leaving behind a document in which he repudiated the constitution he had shown to obey. The parrot, oh my gosh, I can't say this word. Go look at this word, everybody. Thank you, whoever blocked that person, thanks. Look at this. Yes, Haiti, free Haiti. It's perjury. It's something that easy. Perjury of the royal family was patent now to every living soul in France, including the masses, who, warned by Marat, M-A-R-A-T, had known this was going to happen and had done what they could to prevent it. The bourgeoisie had had enough of the masses in politics, and when the king fled, they were far more concerned with Paris than with the treacherous monarch. In this great crisis, Barnave emerged as their leader and trustee representative. He reminded the assembly of what had happened on July 14th, and the day which had unleashed the revolution and put these gentlemen where they were. Hey Finn, you're welcome to join, Finn, if you want to. The bourgeoisie must arm, not against the king, but to put the masses in their place. He called for the arming of the citizens, i.e. the bourgeois National Guard. Under Barnave's firm guidance, the constituent transferred the executive power into its own hand. Do you know what page we're on?
No, I just don't have internet, so I don't have access to my computer to access the book. I'll just be listening while I'm eating.
If you want to, I appreciate that. The more the merrier. Thank you.
Yeah.
But just let me know if you get busy and you have to go do something. That's all.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. Thank you. We're talking, just to keep you up, we're talking about after the bourgeois revolution in France, and they're talking about what they have to do with the colonial situation. And there's a bit of a division where they want to keep the slaves and not give biracial people rights and stuff to be able to own property and to keep slaves and stuff like that. So we're in the middle of this right now. So that's the question. They're in the middle of debating the questions and shit. So just thought I'd keep you up to date.
Thank you so much for the summary, because this is around the time period when Arthur de Gobineau starts coming out with his shit. But thank you.
Yeah, no worries. And I don't know if this is Louis or Louis, so I'm just guessing. If the people had been guarding Louis or Louis, he would have never have gotten away. And now it was the people who caught him before he could make contact with the enemies of his country. Barnave, B-A-R-N-A-V-E, was sent as one of the commissioners to bring him back to Paris, and this characteristic bourgeoisie offered his services to the Queen in the coach. Revolutionary Paris was the common enemy. On June 22nd, a deputy threw out the phrase, quote, The king and the royal family have been abducted. End quote. The constituent preferred the people to believe that the king had gone against his will. The radicals tried to protest. The constituents would not listen and follow Barnave. But there are times when people cannot bluff the people, and they crowded into the streets day after day, demanding that the perjured king should go. On July 14th, the second anniversary of the taking of the Bastille, Bastille, the masses gathered together at the Champ de Mars to present a petition for the king's deposition. The bourgeois National Guard under Lafayette shot them down. In the face of the revolutionary people, the reaction drew closer together. Marat had to go into hiding. Danton fled to London. Barnave, the brother, Lemeth, Millat, and Valblanc, both of whom we have seen proving that the slaves were happy, comprised the affluence or king's party and dominated the assembly. In August came letters from Governor Blanche detailing the violent reception of the May decree by the planters. Blanchelady, who was taking instructions from the Club Mosaic, sided with them and foretold the calamities which would ensue if the decree were enforced. When it came officially, Barnave and his friends were still holding up this dispatch. A new minister gave strict orders that it was to be sent at once. The clerks in the office were prevailed upon and disobeyed so that in the end the decree never reached San Domingo's officially. The commissioners who were to enforce it never left. Petitions and protests came from San Domingo. Petitions, many of them fictitious, came also from the maritime towns. With revolutionary Paris crowded with submission outside, the Democrats in the House had lost their influence. The center was under the influence of the Foulents. F-E-U, we're going to find out what that word means anyways. F-E-U-I-L-L-A-N-T-S. We're going to find out what that word is real quick. Be right back, Finn. It's a French word. It's fouillant. Fouillant. And that means, let's find out what fouillant means. Is that it? Yes. Historical term referring to 16th century reform, branch of, can't say that word, monks, or more famously, the moderate political group during the French Revolution. See, we're on the French Revolution. I gotta show you a new book that I found, Finn, after this read.
Sounds good.
And in fouillant. And in the last week of the constituent's existence, Barnave, who had not attended the Colonial Commission since the defeat on May 15th, appeared at the tribune and moved in effect the rescinding of the May decree. This regime, said Barnave, is absurd, but it is established, and one cannot handle it roughly without unloosening the greatest disorder. The regime is oppressive, but it gives a livelihood of several million Frenchmen. This regime of barbarous, but a still greater barbarism, will be the result if you interfere with it without the necessary knowledge. Bourgeoisie hypocrisy is not seldom the trustiest wisdom. and a great empire, and honest minds go ill together. Barnave was honest but a fool. Instead of taking a leaf from his friends across the channel and boldly stating that the constituent was withholding the rights in the truest interest of the biracial peoples themselves, he rubbed the constituent on the raw with every word and gave ammunition to his enemies in Paris and in San Domingo. But the assembly, on the defensive against the revolution, yielded on the September 24th, rescinding the decree of May 15th. On September 28th, another decree ordered the departure of new commissioners for San Domingo, and on the 29th, the constituent ceased to sit. The colonial question was, see, they're still going over this colonial question. The colonial question was no subordinate interest of the constituent assembly. Far from being an assembly, the theoreticians and visionaries, as conservatives like to represent them, the political representatives of the bourgeoisie were sober men of businesses. Too sober, for they had no color prejudice. They were profoundly ashamed of the injustice they were perpetuating, but standing too loose so much, allowing themselves to be frightened by the colonial deputies. For this cowardice they paid heavily, abroad and at home. And it was the colonial question which demoralized the constituents. Now, if I say anything that's problematic, yeah, I understand. It's okay, Joe, I understand. If I say anything that you said that's kind of like based in racism, please let me know, because some words I don't know if they're slurs. Like I did one time, I went and I spelled them out and said them, and then I looked and I was like, oh, and then Joe told me, and I was like, so Gerards, Jaures, so weak on colonial events, but so strong on the parliamentary assemblies, as has traced his demoralization with a profound insight of a great parliamentarian. Hitherto, says Gerards, the revolutionary bourgeoisie had been responsibly honest. If they had limited the franchise, and at least they had done so openly, but to avoid giving the biracial peoples the rights of man, they had to descend to low dodges and crooked negotiations, which destroyed the revolutionary integrity. It was the guilty conscience of the constituent of the colonial question that placed it at the mercy of the reactionaries. When Louis fled, undoubtedly but for the compromise of Barnave and all of his party on the colonial question, the general attitude of the assembly after the flight of Vernice would have been different, end quote. But it was not the biracial peoples they feared. It was the slaves. Slavery corrupted the society of San Domingo and now corrupted the French bourgeoisie and the first flush and pride of its political inheritance. Reaction triumphed, but phases of the revolution are not decided in parliaments. They are only registered there. The radicals were concentrating their forces in the Jacobin club, which had led the revolution to its conclusion. Barnave and the Lameths had long been oracles of the club, but on the day after the constituent ceased to sit, the club expelled them from the part they had taken in depriving the mixed biracial peoples of the rights of man. The breach imminent. I can't say this word. Sometimes I have the hardest time with the easiest words.
Is it
It's imminent. Yeah, it doesn't have a G in it. Yeah, imminent. Since the massacre of Champ de Mars was now open, And meanwhile, what of the slaves? They had heard that of the revolution and had construed it in their own image. The white slaves in France had risen and killed their masters, and were now enjoying the fruits of the earth. It was great. So they thought. So they thought that the okay. It was. They didn't understand it was a bourgeois revolution, not a people's revolution. The bourgeois utilized the people in order to do the revolution. Yeah, okay. It was gravely inaccurate. In fact, but they had caught the spirit of the thing. Revolution. Liberty, equality, fraternity. Before the end of 1789, there were risings in Guadeloupe and Martinique. As early as October, in Fort Dauphin, one of the future centers of San Domingo's insurrection, the slaves were stirring and holding mass meetings in the forest at night, in the South Province, watching the fight between their masters for and against the revolution. They had shown signs of unrest. In isolated plantations, there were movements. All were bloodily repressed. Revolutionary literature was circulating among them, but the colonialists were themselves giving a better example than all the revolutionary tracts which found their way to the colony. D. Wimpfen asked them if they were not afraid to be perpetually discussing liberty and equality before their slaves, but their own passion were too violent to be restrained. Their quick resort to arms, their lynching, murders, and mutilation of biracial peoples and political enemies were showing the slaves how liberty and equality were won or lost. Of the men who were to lead their brothers to freedom, none of them, as far as we know, was yet active. Okay, here we go. The Dessalines, Dessalines, already 40, worked as a slave for his black master. Christophe listened. Christophine listened to the talk in the hotel where he worked, but had no constructive ideas. Toussaint alone read his Renal, quote, a courageous chief only is wanted. He said after that, from the time the troubles began, he felt he was destined for great things. Exactly what, however, he did not know. He and his brother slaves only watched their masters destroy one another, as Africans watched them in 1914 and 1918, and was watching them again before long. But white San Domingo was not thinking of slaves in 1791, nor too much of biracial people, except to lynch and rob. The weakness of government had unloosed the rivalries of great whites and small whites. So these are the different class things, you know, the rich whites and and around the slogans of liberty and equality, white concades and red fought for supremacy with the special violence of slave owners and the adherent temperament of the tropics. In March, 2 regiments of soldiers were due in San Domingo to assist the government to keep the patriots in order. The inhabitants of Port-au-Prince prepared elaborately to win them over from the royalist government. They opened the cafe to them, greeted them with music and dancing, and unlimited food and drinks, told them that the government was the counter-revolution, as indeed it was. The soldiers refused to obey their commanders and the governor and joined the Patriot Party. Mauduts, own soldiers, hitherto royal, under the crossfire of the population and the new arrival from France, caught up in the revolutionary ardor. Ardour. Ardour. Do you know how to say that?
Abdul.
Yeah. Turn on Demandant. They murdered him and mutilated his body. sparing it no indignity. Hostile to the smell, whites and patriots were to the rich biracial people. They did not disdain the alliance of the biracial patriots. The biracial women who held De Mont's feet so that his head might be more easily cut off was rewarded with the direction of the hospital. Rigaud, a leader of the biracial people who had been imprisoned by De Mont, was liberated by the crowd. A new municipality took over the functions of government, and the Maltese deserters, the Prolato by name, assumed command of the artillery. The parishes of the West Province accept the new government, and de Blanchelade, the governor, fled to Le Cap, where the merchants and the lawyers held him virtually prisoner. All this took place in March 1791, but something else had also taken place. The French soldiers on landing at Port-au-Prince had given the fraternal embrace of all biracial peoples and all black people, telling them that the assembly in France had declared all men free and equal. At many places near Port-au-Prince, the black people, they used the N-word, were seizing arms and rebelling. At one spot, they came out with such force and determination that the merchandises and all the proprietors in the neighborhood were needed to suppress them. The colonialists had to fire and charge. The slaves did not surrender until their leaders had fallen. A dozen were hung. Hanging would settle everything. The Marquis de Caradu, wealthy planter commander of the National Guard of Port-au-Prince, earned the admiration of his fellow slave owners for his vigor and ingenuity as a hanging propagandist. Quote, "If there is any trouble about killing them off, you only have to call on Caradu, who has made 50 heads fly on the Abri plantation, and in order that everybody should know about it, had them fixed on a pike along the hedges of his plantation, palm tree fashions," end quote. To such men, the news of the May decree giving rights to 400 biracial people was a dangerous symptom, an outrage unspeakable. They lynched biracial peoples. They stamped upon the French flag. They adjured France. They could not mention France or Frenchmen without oaths or curses. The new assembly, which was to be replaced the broken assembly of St. Mark, met at Leogain in early August and passed a series of resolutions designed to ensure independence. In order to be nearer to the center of affairs, the members decided to transfer to Le Cap, where the governor was, but some of the deputies were never reached there, being killed on the way by revolting black people of the North. These, luckily for themselves, had no deputies in Paris listening to parliamentary promises and weakening their will, neglecting and ignoring by all the politicians of every brand and persuasion. They had organized on their own and struck for freedom at last. All right, that's the end of that chapter. Any questions, anybody?
Antiquity is asking, what year are we currently in?
What?
Antiquity asked, what year are we currently in?
Around the 1700s. The last date I saw was like 1791. That's the last date I saw, 1791.
Yeah, which I would like to correct myself. What I said in the beginning. No, Arthur de Gobineau did not start writing during this time. Because he actually started writing on the second, I don't know if to call it a revolution, but a second French Revolution in the 1800s.
Yeah.
Just correcting myself there.
Yeah. Let's go down. We're on chapter 4 now. No. Is this chapter 4? What's Roman numeral 1 and V? Is that 4?
Yes.
Okay, good. The San Domingo masses begin. Bamba. Hugh. Kanga. Bafui. T. Kanga mu dili. Kanga du ke la. Kanga du ke la. Kanga la. Okay. That was that must have been something in I think it's in Creole. Because I think they're learning Creole. In Haiti, I think that's the main language is Creole. I'm not sure. I can't remember.
The de facto language is French, I mean, due to colonization, but yeah, a lot of people speak Creole, for sure.
Yeah. The slaves worked on the land, and like revolutionary peasants everywhere, they aimed at the extermination of their oppressors. But working and living together in gangs of hundreds on the huge sugar factories which covered the North Plains, where they were closer to a modern proletariat than any group of workers in existence at the time, and the raising was, therefore, and thoroughly prepared the organized mass movements. By hard experience, they had learnt that isolated efforts were doomed to failure. And in the earlier months of 1791, in and around Le Cap, they were organizing for revolution. Voodoo was a medium of conspiracy. In spite of all prohibitions, the slaves traveled miles to sing and dance and practice the rites and talk. And now, since the revolution, to hear the political news and make their plans. Bookman, a Poyaloi, Paloi, or high priest, a gigantic black person, was the leader. He was headed of a plantation and followed the political situation, both among the whites and among the biracial peoples. By the end of July 1791, black people in and around Le Cap were ready and waiting. The plan was conceived on the massive scale, and they aimed at exterminating the whites and take the colony for themselves. There were perhaps 12,000 slaves in Le Cap, 6,000 of them men. One night, the slaves in the suburbs and outskirts of Le Cap were to fire the plantations. At this single, the slaves in the town would massacre the whites, and the slaves on the plain would complete the destruction. They had traveled a long way since the grandiose prisoning scheme of Mecca Kundal. The plan did not succeed in its entirety, but it very nearly did. And the scope and organization of this revolt shows Bookman to be the first of that line of great leaders whom the slaves were to throw up in such profusion and rapidity during the years which followed. To that so vast a conspiracy was not discovered until it had actually broken out is a testimony of their solidarity. What's going on with the revolution is definitely, they were correct. It's definitely going to affect their colonies, and here's the effect of it. It inspired them to fucking revolt because they misinterpret it because they misinterpret it for a peasant or a slave revolt, but it was actually a bourgeoisie revolt that utilized the proletariat to fight their wars. But hey, you know what? If it's a motivation, it's a motivation. You know? In early August, the slaves in Lempi, then and to the end of the revolution, one of the storm centers, rose prematurely, and were crushed. This Lempi rising showed that it was dangerous to delay. 3 days after, representatives from parishes all over the plain assembled to fix the day. Deputies on their way to Le Cap for the first session of Colonial Assembly to begin on August 25th. met throngs of slaves on the road who abused and even attacked them. On August 21st, some prisoners were taken, and Blancheladi, the governor, examined them himself the next day. He did not get much from them, but he understood vaguely that there was to be some sort of raising. He took precautions to safeguard the city from the slaves within, and he ordered patrols to cover the outskirts. But these whites despised the slaves too much to believe them capable of organizing a mass movement on a grand scale. They could not get from the prisoners the names of the leaders, and what precautions could they take against the thousands of slaves on the hundreds of plantations? Some of the whites rabble. What's RABBELE? That's rabble, right? Yeah, white rabble in Le Cap, always ready to loot and pillage, were revealed as being connected with a plot of some sort. Labdi was more concerned about these than about black people. On the night of the 22nd, a tropical storm raged, with lightning and gusts of wind, heavy showers of rain, carried torches to light their way. The leaders of the revolt met in an open space in a thick forest of the Maroon Rouge, a mountain overlooking Le Cap. Their bookman gave the last instructions, and after voodoo incantations, and the sucking of the blood of a stuck pig, he simulated his followers by a prayer spoken in Creole, which like so much spoken in such occasions, has remained. Sorry, quote: "The God who created the sun, which gives us light, who rouses the waves and rules the storm, though hidden in the clouds, he watches us. He sees all the white man does. The God of the white man inspires him with crime, but our God calls upon us to do good works. Our God, who is good to us, orders us to revenge our wrongs. He will direct our arms and aid us through away the symbol of the God of the whites, who has so often caused us to weep and listen to the voice of liberty, which speaks in the hearts of all of us." End quote. The symbol of the God of the whites was the cross, which as Catholics they wore around their necks. That very night, they began. The slaves, I gotta make sure, the slaves on the Galifet plantation were so well treated that, quote, "happy as black people of Gafet," end quote, as was a slave proverb. Yet, by the phenomenon noticed in all revolutions, it was they who led the way. Each slave gang murdered its masters and burnt the plantation to the ground. The precautions that de Blanche Dalid Landy had taken saved Le Cap, but the preparations otherwise had been thorough and complete, and in a few days, one half of the famous North Plains was a flaming ruin. From Le Cap, the whole horizon was a wall of fire. From this wall continually rose thick black volumes of smoke, through which came tongues of flame leaping to the very sky. For nearly 3 weeks, the people of Le Cap would barely distinguish day from night, while a rain of burning cane straw, driven before the wind like flakes of snow, flew over the city and the shipping in the harbor, threatening both with destruction. The slaves destroyed tirelessly like the peasants in Jacquerie, Jacquerie, or La Ludati wreckers. I'm sorry, these are all French words. They were seeking their salvation in most obvious ways. The destruction of what they knew was the cause of their suffering. And if they destroyed much, it was because they had suffered much. They knew that as long as these plantations stood, their lot would be to labor on them until they dropped. The only thing was to destroy them. For their masters, from their masters, they had known great torture, degradation, and, at the slightest provocation, death. They returned in kind. For 2 centuries, the higher civilizations has shown them that power was used for wrecking your will on those whom you control. Now that they held power, they did as they had been taught. In the frenzy of the first encounter, they killed all. Yet they spared the priests whom they feared and the surgeons who they had been kind to them. They whose women had undergone countless violations, violated all the women who had fell into their hands, often on the bodies of their still bleeding husbands, father, and brothers. Vengeance, vengeance was their war cry, and one of them carried a white child on a pike as a standard. And yet they were surprisingly moderate. Then and afterward, far more humane than their masters that had been or would ever be to them. They did not maintain their revengeful spirit for long. The cruelties of property and privilege are always more ferocious than the revenge of property and oppression. For the one aims at perpetuating resentment and justice, and the other is merely a momentary passion, soon appeased. As the revolution gained territory, they spared many of men, women, and children, whom they surprised on plantations. To prisoners of war alone, they remained merciless. They tore out their flesh with red-hot pincers. They roast them on slow fires. They sawed a carpenter between 2 of his boards. Yet, in all the records of that time, there is no single instance of such fiendish tortures as burying white men up to the neck and smearing the holes of their face to attract insects, or blowing them up with gunpowder, or any of the 1,001 bestialities to which they had been subjected. Compared with what their masters had done to them in cold blood, what they did was negligible, and they were spurred on by the ferocity with which the whites in Le Cap treated all slave prisoners who fell into their hands. So they just repaid them. So the thing is they're saying is they were taught by the colonizer to do these things. So there you go. They're just returning the favor of what you taught them.
Well, and again, it's like, so as I'm listening to all of these events unravel about the first French Revolution, I mean, this whole thing is a replay of like a combination of what happened in the Anglo colonization of of this specific region of Turtle Island, and then a combination of what Israel Nod is doing.
Yeah.
Because you're saying there, okay, so they pretty much, these colonizers taught them how to do all of these methods of torture. How is that any different than what goes on in the West Bank?
Yeah.
Most of the people who do the assault and the harassment and the vandalizing of Palestinians in the West Bank is not the Israeli police. It's literally civilians.
That's the point of colonialism, right? Your police is the people, the ones taking the lands and expropriating it to themselves. You know what I mean?
Exactly, and that's why I get so angry when people say, well, that's the government. You have to separate the government from the people. No. The government is there because the government mirrors what the people is that they want.
So, in my understanding, I'm seeing this perspective. White people in the United States that are settlers, they're agents, right? They're agents, and they're not officially police, but they utilize white people. What do? They go and they say, "Oh my gosh, this black person is walking on this side. I gotta call the cops." They're surveillance systems for the police in a sense too.
Well, that's true, and that's literally, you know, that part of the Second Amendment that says, "Oh, every locality and state has their right to their own local militia." Who's gonna make the fucking local militia? The fucking
white people.
yeah, the fucking hillbilly that lives right next to your fucking house that, "Oh, look at me, I got a fucking AR-15."
Yeah. One that wants to keep the status quo going and keep whiteness and stay in his position of power, even though it's probably limited. You know what I mean? Because again, us people, not the ruling class, we go do their shit for them, but they sit back and do. You know what I mean?
Which is why I really appreciate that you made the description of us as agents.
Yeah.
Of the state. But
yeah,
sorry, I went on a tangent there.
No, you're good. We fight their wars for them, for their own profits and stuff. Oh my gosh, another appeal. It's fucking weird. All right, let's move on. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. As usual, the strength of the masses movement dragged in its wake revolutionary sections of those classes nearest to it. Free black people joined them. Planters of Port Maggot. It says Maggot, had taught his black foreman to read and write. He made him free. He had left him in his will 10,000 francs, had given the foreman's mother land on which he had made a coffee plantation. But this black person raised the slaves on the plantation of his masters and his own mother, set them on fire, and joined the revolution, gave him a high command. The biracial peoples hated the black slaves because they were slaves and because they were black. But when they actually saw the slaves taking action on such a grand scale, numbers of young biracial people from Le Camp and around about rushed to join a hitherto despised black people and fight against the common enemy. So it sounds like like this even is describing colorism, because the biracial people, which is the M word, were seen better and got better privileges. They weren't completely white, but they got in this situation, they got better conditions. So like some of these people that are biracial didn't like black slaves, and some of them fought on the side of it. So just
so you know, that continues up to nowadays, because that's why I always tell you guys, most of the most racist people in Latin America that you're ever going to find, or at least I can't call people who are the M word racist, because technically they're still BIPOC, but the people who are the most racist and the most racially biased, it's usually going to be either Dominicans or Argentinians, because Dominicans, who most of their population consists of, you know, people, the MU people, and that's the majority of their population, and that's the same kind of mentality still lives up to nowadays. Now, in Argentina, it's, you know, I don't know if you've ever heard this about Argentina, but they hate it when you tell them that they're Latin American. They will immediately correct you and say, no, we're Italian, we're Spanish.
We're Portuguese.
Yeah.
Yeah. They want so bad to assimilate into whiteness because whiteness gives this false power to these people. You know, they'll never have the power, you know? Anyways.
Well, in the case of Argentinians, most of them are white, but yeah.
Because even Che came out as having to deconstruct his racism, his whiteness, and throughout his revolutionary past and progression, he became very anti-racist and then betrayed whiteness. You know what I mean? So, yeah, he started out that way, but ended up The other way. So yeah, here we go. Let me see here. They were fortunate in that the troops of Le Camp were few and Blanchy de la Ladie, afraid of the slaves and the white rebels in the town, preferred to act on the defensive. One attack was made by the regulars who drove the slaves before them, but Blanchy Ladie yielded to the nervous fears awakening in the city, recalled the detachment. This left the revolution master of the court side gained courage. Black people and extended their destructions over the plain. If they had had the slightest material interest in the plantation, they would not have destroyed so wantonly. But they had none. After a few weeks, they stopped for a moment to organize themselves. It is at this period, 1 month after the revolt had begun, that Toussaint Brady joined them and made an unobtrusive interest in history. Let me look at this word real quick. Let me look at this word real quick. So I tried to. It's unobtrusive. There it is. Interest into history. Okay. It seems certain that he had been in secret communications with the leaders, but like so many men of better education than the rank and file, he lacked their boldness at the moment of action and waited to see how things would go. Meanwhile, hating destruction, he kept his master's slaves in order to prevent the revolutionary laborers from setting fire to the plantation. While all the other whites in the neighborhood made a dash for Le Camp, Madame Bayonne de Libertas remained on the plantation, protected by Toussaint. Bayou de Libertas himself was with a camp of planters not far off, on guard against the slaves, but came every day to the plantation. Toussaint, as always, master of himself, and of all near to him, maintained this untenable situation for over a month. But as the insurrection grew, worn out by the strain of defending the property, his masters and his mistress, and learning that Madame de Libertas' life was now in danger, he decided that the old life was over and a new one had begun. He told Madame de Libertas, can't say her name, that the time had come for her to go to Le Camp, packed her and some valuables in a carriage, and sent her off under the care of his brother Paul. He sent his own wife and the 2 children of the household into a safe spot in Spanish San Domingo, when he slowly made his way to the camp of revolting slaves. This is good. A man who is deliberately decided to join the revolution was 45 years of age, an advanced age for those times, gray already, and known to everyone as Old Toussaint. Out of the chaos of San Domingo that existed then and for years to follow, he would lay the foundation of the Black State that lasted to this day. From the moment he joined the revolution, he was a leader and moved without serious rivalry to the first rank. We have clearly stated the vast impersonal forces at work in the crisis of San Domingo, but men make history, and Toussaint made the history that he made because he was the man he was. He had had exceptional opportunities, and both in mind and body was far beyond the average slave. Slavery dulls the intellect and degrades the character of the slave. There was nothing of that dullness and degradation in Toussaint. His post as steward of the livestock had given him experience in administration, authority, and intercourse with those who ran the plantation. Men who, by sheer ability and character, found themselves occupying positions usually reserved for persons of a different upbringing, education, and class, usually performed those duties with exceptional care and devoted labor. In addition, to this practical education, he had, as we have seen, been able to read a little. He had read Caesar's commentary, which had given him some idea of politics and a military art and the connection between them. Having read and reread the long volume by the Abbé Raynal, Abberanal, on the East and West Caribbean, he had a thorough grounding in the economics and politics, not only of San Domingo, but of all the great empires of Europe, which were engaged in colonial expansion and trade. Finally, he had the exceptional experience of the last 3 years of revolution in San Domingo. The plantation was only 2 miles from the camp, and his deputies took him often into the town. The masses of the people learned much during a revolution, far more a man like Toussaint. His superb intellect had therefore had some opportunity of cultivating itself in general affairs at home and abroad. From the beginning, he maneuvered with an uncanny certainty, not only between local parties in San Domingo, but between the international forces at work. An important thing for his future was that his character was quite unwarped. Since his childhood, he had probably never been whipped, as so many slaves had been whipped. He himself tells us that he and his wife were among the fortunate few who had acquired the modest competence, and used to go hand in hand, and a very happy to work on a little plot of land which some of the slaves cultivated for themselves. Besides his knowledge and experience, through natural strength and character, he had acquired a formidable mastery over himself, both mind and body. As a boy, he was so frail and delicate that his parents had not expected him to live, and he was nicknamed Little Stick. While still a child, he determined to acquire not only knowledge, but a strong body, and he strengthened himself by severest exercises, so that by the time he was 12, he had surpassed all boys of his age on the plantation in athletic feats. He could swim across a dangerous river, jump on a horse at full speed, and do what he liked with it. When he was nearly 60, he was still the finest rider in San Domingo. Habitually rode 125 miles a day and sat his horse with such ease and grace, and he was known as the Centaur of Savannas. As a young man, he had run after women. Then he decided to settle down, refusing to live in a concubinage which was so widely prevalent among all classes in San Domingo, but particularly among the slaves. He married a woman who already had a son. She bore Toussaint one child, and he and his wife lived together in the greatest harmony and friendship. When he was master of all San Domingo, just as in the days when he was an ordinary slave, for the life that so many lived in the colonies, for the reputation that he had among black people, and the opportunities that his position offered. This was an unusual thing for a man who had begun life as Toussaint had, and who, in the days of his greatness, was partial to the society of attractive women. From childhood, he had begun taciturn, which singled him out among his countrymen, a talkative, argumentative people. He was very small, ugly, and ill-shaped, but although his general expression was one of benevolence, he had eyes like steel, and no one ever laughed in his presence. His comparative learning, his success in life, his character and personality gave him an immense prestige among all black people who knew him. And he was a man of some consequence among the slaves long before the Revolution. Knowing his superiority, he never had the slightest doubt that his destiny was to be their leader, nor would those with whom he came in contact take long to recognize it. All right, hold on a second. Hey, Mr. Carrot Cake, let me see something here. Remember page 105. Just want to look. 105. Trying to see if there's anything. I could probably go into another dash. 105. Are starting to get in. I think we're starting to head in. And we're talking more about Toussaint. So that's good. Did I say 105? Yeah. Okay. We're going to another dash mark. Nothing could be imagined more calculated to revolt his orderly mind than the spectacle which the slave camp presented. Oh my gosh, I have another appeal to do. Yay! Just doing the same appeal over and over again. Nothing could be imagined. Oh yeah. Nothing could be imagined more calculated to revolt his orderly mind than the spectacle which the slave camp presented. Many men were entirely naked. Others wore filthy rags made out of bits and pieces of silk and satin. Pillage from the plantation. Their weapons were a few guns and pistols that they had seized, old rusty swords, agricultural implements, sticks, pointed with iron, pieces of iron hoop. In fact, anything they could lay their hands on. They were destitute of ammunition, and the cavalry were mounted on old horses and mules worn down by fatigue. They were divided into large bands, one under Basui, Biassou, and other under Jean Francisco, while a third leader was Janot. Jean Francisco was a native of San Domingo, good-looking, very intelligent, and of a proud spirit which had made him run away from his master and become a Maroon long before revolutions. So the Maroons were the ones that went away from the slave revolt. Hey Zion. In addition to his exceptional intelligence, he was very brave, very sober, and of a tenacity that never admitted defeat. Baisuye was a fire eater, always drunk, always ready for the fiercest and most dangerous exploits. He also had a life more easy than usual, having belonged to a religious establishment, the Fathers of Charity, not far from Le Cap. Janot was the slave who had led the foolish expedition of the San Domingo Whites in the early days of the revolution, when dressed up in their military uniforms. They had looked around for the enemy on whom to practice. Like their more educated white masters, the slave hastened to deck themselves with all the trappings and titles of military profession. The officers called themselves generals, colonels, marshals, commanders, and the leaders decorated themselves with scraps of uniform, ribbons, and orders, which they found on the plantation or took from their enemy killed in battle. Basui called himself a brigadier. So did Janot. Later, Jean Francisco entitled himself in the fashion of European colonial governors to this day. Admiral General Lamisio and Chevalier of the Order of St. Louis, while Basu, after a quarrel with Jean Francisco, assumed the title of viceroy of the conquered territories. Yet despite these absurdities, which served the same purpose of impressing their inferiors as a trappings, gold epaulets, and multifarious commands of 20th century royalty, Jean Francisco and Basua were men born to command. Nothing but an iron discipline could have kept order among the heterogeneous body of men who released from slavery, and Basu and Jean Francisco imposed it with an iron hand. Janot was a cruel monster who used to drink the blood of his white victims and commit abdominal cruelties based. Jean Francisco arrested him, tried him, and had him shot, a conspicuous difference from the behavior of the white colonists in the case of La June. Jean Francisco soon foresaw a long war and ordered the planting of provisions. Thus early, the slave leaders were showing a sense of order, discipline, and capacity to govern. Many emissaries of the royalist counter-revolution found their way to the slaves. The priests in large numbers remained among them. But even the biracial people failed to oust these black leaders, and Jean Francisco and Basu, who were in command at the beginning of the revolution, remained masters of their respective bands to the end. Toussaint joined the band of Basui, I can't say his name, on account of his knowledge of herbs. Basu appointed him physician to the armies of the king, and from the very beginning Toussaint was high up in his council. Masses roused to the revolution pitched need above all a clear and vigorous direction. But the first coup had failed, and Jean Francisco and Bassoon thought they could keep order, had not the faintest idea what to do next. De Blanchy Ladi sent them a proclamation demanding their submission. They refused, but in their reply called themselves the servants of God and the king, and naively invited the whites to take all their possessions and leave the island to those who had watered it with their sweat. To these bewildered political leaders, Toussaint brought his superior knowledge and the political vice which usually accompanied it. And we'll end right there. Buasson? I'm horrible with French names. I'm so sorry.
Don't worry, so am I. Boisou.
I keep forgetting to tell everybody that, like, I'm horrible at pronouncing names, but I will try my best, and I'm good with corrections. People can come to me and try to correct me. I have a hard time with pronunciations. I think it's something to do with my dyslexia, honestly.
No, don't worry. The thing is that French is like so anti-phonetic that it's really deeply anti-phonetic to the point that you could have like a really long word with an unnecessary amount of letters that you're not even going to pronounce. Those letters are just supposed to be there as an indicator of what word they're specific talking about.
Oh, okay.
It's yeah.
All right. I'm gonna put on my headset so I can hear it.
Yeah.
So I'll be right back. Hold on a second. Because I like the echoing.
Okay.
Hold on. I'm almost there.
I like this book though.
All right, I'm here. What'd you say?
I just said I like this book.
This book is good. I love how C.L.R. James writes. It's very good. Very, very good. You know what I mean? He's very descriptive and stuff, and not too technical. Even though he does have some technical words, but it's very, very, very well detailed. I personally think. You know what I mean? I love how he goes back and like creates the history to set up the time, and now we're just getting into it. We're getting into Toussaint. Like Toussaint was mentioned in the beginning and a little throughout this page, but then he's bringing back up because the revolution is starting. So this is going to be interesting. This is going to be fun, you know. So C.L.R. James is a Pan-African Marxist, just to let you know, and stuff like that. So it looks like we're gonna see what happens next. You know what I mean? But what's your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, number one, there were a lot of things that stuck out to me from just this portion that we've read. Mm-hmm. And I hate using the word lazy, but I honestly don't have any other word to use. But after reading this section that you just read to us, I can notice even more, because I already noticed it prior to listening to this, but now I'm noticing even more how much historical laziness there is. Mm-hmm. Because, again, you were at the beginning, we were reading about how the majority of the representatives of the National Assembly were made of business owners during this bourgeois revolution.
Yep.
And this just like straight up denial that exists nowadays, and even academic apologists, but capitalist apologists, like libertarians who do apologetics for capitalism, even they deny this historical fact. Mm-hmm. And so I'm confused in a very frustrating way as to why most college campuses in the West just completely brush out that part of French history.
It's because it's a defeat, and you don't want to give glory or any type of kudos towards white people getting unalived during the revolution. Because what's that tell everybody? You know what I mean?
It completely defeats the perception of white supremacy.
The next book I'm thinking about reading is called Black Marxism, Making of a Black Radical Tradition. It goes over a lot of the history of the United States, of black revolts and stuff like that. The Maroons, when they talked about the Maroons, those are people that fled from slavery and joined up and created these Maroons. And they would go on little expeditions to do these things. I heard a story, and I don't know if this was from Zion, who said that, I don't know if it was from them, because Zion knows a lot about Haitian revolution. They're a Haitian themselves from Haiti. So they know a lot about this revolution. And they're the person that inspired me that, you know what, it's probably important to learn about the Haitian Revolution, because it's one of the most significant revolutions on Turtle Island. Because remember, the Caribbean is the turtle eggs of Turtle Island. Remember?
That's true. Well, and those were those lands were supposedly where Columbus first arrived on, mm-hmm. which meaning that those are the indigenous people who received the earliest dose of the brutalization of colonialism.
Taínos. Because what they did too is, when you read this book, they brought in African captives to do this, to do free labor on the plantations. Because the Taíno people, you know what I mean? Oh yeah, please don't use the M words. Okay, who used the M word? I don't know if I did. Thank you for reminding, Joe. Thank you. But like Taínos, but like the Taínos were devastated by the Spaniards, so they couldn't even. And I don't know if there was a case, if a case has been made that they couldn't even like make them to slaves to serve like that, to enslave them. So I think that's why they brought in like captives from other places like Africa to serve those plantations. You know what I mean?
And yes, I do know what you mean. Mm-hmm. I do have like a historical hypothesis as to why that may be. But if you don't want to hear it, that's fine. But just let me know. The historical hypothesis that I personally developed as to why that was the case.
Oh, sure.
So, again, this has not been confirmed. This is just me basing it out of the prior historical knowledge that I have about indigenous people in Turtle Island and Abiyala. So, a lot of indigenous languages from Turtle Island and Abiyala, not all of them, but a lot of them are very empirical. What do I mean by that? So if you want to say a sentence in a lot of their languages, you have to, like if you were to say a sentence as like, communist went to the restroom. If you were to say that sentence, technically that wouldn't be grammatically correct, because you really have to say the source to which you got that, you came to that conclusion. So in order for it to be grammatically correct, you would have to say, oh, a blank person told me that communist went to the restroom, or I saw a communist going to the restroom, or whatever, something like that. So again, I don't know about the Taino language, but I'm having like some sort of assumption that the reason as to why they were so hard to enslave was because they were so hard to Christianize in the first place. Do you get what I'm saying? Even though they could still use violence.
Interesting. You know what you could do? You could research that to see if you're correct in your what do you call it? In your inquiry. You can always
I will for sure. Yeah, I will.
And find out where you might have like fell short, or where you might like make an adjustment to it. You know what I mean? But it's an inquiry, but it's worth investigation, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, because what I'm doing right now, if I just say it without going and making the effort to making sure that I get somewhere close to what the truth is, then at this point I'm just speculating.
It's just speculation, but it's worth investigating. You know what I mean?
I will.
Yeah. But yeah, at the beginning of this book, they did talk about like they were detailed about what what enslaved people had to endure in the transportation from the boats to here. And it's rough. It's whoa. That was the beginning of the book. They were very detailed and stuff like that. They even had revolts during that transportation time with inside the boats. Some of them even like just went overboard and died in the seas because, you know, so like it was disgusting. But I do like Sierra L. James. I like his explanations and stuff. They're really good.
Yeah, weren't a lot of them thrown off the boats into just like the ocean?
I think some of them, that could be possible, but according to what I've learned, is some of them just dipped. They're just like, fuck this, I'm out. You know what I mean? And in some cases too, it really holds true because I've heard this from black people that enslaved women, when they gave birth, they would unalive or poison the people because they didn't want their child to be born into slavery. They did the same thing here too. In the beginning of the stories, they talked about that, poisoning people because they didn't want to endure the persecution and the enslavements. They didn't want to bring their children into that condition. You know what I mean? You know? So
yeah,
even talks about that stuff, you know? And I didn't realize that, like, I think if I was in the same position, I'd been like, yeah, no, I don't want to bring a child into this world right now. You know what I mean? Because all he's going to do is be enslaved and die, you know? So
well, of course, and I mean, in that sort of like, that's when your survival instinct activates like way far beyond to what it's supposed to.
Yeah. Before I close out, I want to show you the book I just found that I was recommended. I'm going to read it. Show it to you.
Let's see it.
That one.
Sierra James, Notes on Dialectics. Okay. Left
Hegelianism and Marxist-Leninism. So it's interesting. I'm going to read that. You want to take a picture of it? I'm going to read that though.
Yeah, I just screenshot it right here.
Right now? Or are you doing it now?
I just did, yeah. There we go.
Okay, cool. I'm gonna go back to the other one. All right. Other than that, I'm sorry that the refugees just came out late. We're just finishing up right now. So so we're gonna finish up right now. Finn, thank you for being here. Thank you for participating. The more people that participate, the easier and the more that we can reflect and understand what we're reading. So I appreciate it. I appreciate Joe. Joe would have been here too, but they're not feeling good, and also they're on date night. So thank you,
that's okay.
Everybody that was here, including Antiquity, to ask questions, because the more people that participate, the more we can understand what we're reading, and the more we can guide each other to the correct conclusions and solutions. So, sorry, that's my spiel.
No worries. I mean, that's why I came here today, because I wasn't busy, and I was here. Communist is reading. Let's go over there. So, because they're usually the ones reading a lot of books that are important on research and learning and expanding our knowledge. So that's good. But thanks again for doing this.
Yeah, like my Milpas Maoist group, I think one of our leaders is a person of color. So one of the things that he wants us to ground us in as Maoists is the Black radical tradition, because of the region that we live in. It's very important because there's a huge new African movement out here. You know what I mean? So we have to recognize the Black radical tradition, especially with the conditions that we live under. You know what I mean? So. Yeah,
in here where I live, we're expanding more on the Chicano tradition, which is, I think sometime this week or next week, I'm going to start reading the Chicano Struggle, and I can't remember the other part of the book, but it's written by the MIM prisons.
Nice.
It's a Maoist organization, Chicano organization that they were the ones who were actively trying to lobby against and fight against I don't know if you know this about Arizona, but there was a ban on Chicano literature in schools in Arizona up until from 2010 up until 2017.
That's still recent.
Yeah, it's still, and the thing is that it's still censored to a certain extent. And so what this organization does, and I can't give too much details about this organization just for safety purposes, but yes. More on that later. Yeah, you know what I mean. But they actively they weren't able to get that out of the way, but there's still some struggles along the way. So that's why I'm trying to get more in touch with the Chicano tradition.
Well, struggles and contradictions never stop. It advances. If you take on the contradictions and you take the criticisms of things, it can advance you further into the correct direction that is suitable, that the masses will pick too. So, you know, if it's a Maoist org, it's pretty cool. You know?
Yeah,
I'm part of a local Maoist group out here in my region.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. But anyways, I'm going to go ahead and call it, and I'm going to go feed Rufus, and we'll see what the night brings. Okay?
Okay. Oh, yeah, I forgot you have Rufus. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No big deal. If I hope you join tomorrow, and I hope Joe joins tomorrow too. So, all right.
I'll try because I'm gonna be working, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah. I understand what your position is, you know, but like I said, with you and Joe and other people showing up, it helps me a lot. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. I'm gonna call it. Have a good night, Finn. I'll see you around.